Hi everyone and welcome to this month's AAIB Bulletin Debrief for June 2025 from Final Descent UK. Remember to like, comment and subscribe if you enjoy the video. We've got 2 general aviation and 1 commercial incident to discuss. Do stay tuned right to the end as you won't believe the shocking actions of a pilot in the last accident. Let's get started. I probably couldn't do a video this month without mentioning Air India Flight AI 141. It's not a UK accident, so I probably won't be discussing it in one of my videos. There's obviously a lot of speculation online as to the cause, and hopefully we'll have some answers soon. The first incident we'll discuss was the Cessna 152 registration Golf Bravo Sierra Zulu Whiskey at Blackbushe Airport in Surrey on the 24th of February 2024. It was a training flight with a student and instructor on board who had 1,265 hours of experience. During takeoff, the instructor considered that the student wasn't using enough right rudder and told him to apply more. The student protested that he was doing just that, but it wasn't making any difference to the control of the aircraft. The instructor took control and he also found that the right rudder was not responding to control inputs. He flew the circuit and made an uneventful landing, after which the aircraft was inspected and it was noted that the right rudder cable linkage had snapped where it attached to the rudder bell crank. The bell crank was missing and could not be located, suggesting it had failed in flight. There were paint marks and evidence of contact on the airframe, suggesting the bell crank had been fouling on the structure for some time. Further examination identified that the failure was predominantly due to stress corrosion cracking. The manufacturer was asked to comment on the situation and they stated that they were not aware of any similar failures but suggested a tail strike, incorrectly set rudder stops allowing over travel or incorrect reassembly during routine maintenance could have been a contributing factor. The aircraft's defect log was reviewed and didn't reveal any other anomalies. The investigation concluded that there was linkage failure caused by stress due to the bell crank rubbing on the fuselage, but the reason for this couldn't be determined. The maintenance organisation suggested that the bell crank could have been bent or misaligned. However, this wasn't obvious during the examination of the aircraft, which was fully repaired and returned to service. We'll next discuss the only commercial incident this month, which involved an Airbus Helicopters EC175 registration Golf Mike Charlie Sierra Hotel, which was flying from Aberdeen to Elgin oil platform in the North Sea on the 17th of February 2023. Storm Otto was due to pass through the area and the crew paid special attention to the weather briefing. As the handling team pulled the helicopter out of its hangar in the morning, the rotors started to slowly rotate. They shouldn't have been moving at all as the rotor brake was applied, which stops inadvertent movement of the rotors due to wind or to slow the rotors to a stop quickly after landing. One of the tug team had to climb up and grab the rotor to stop it from contacting the cab of the tug. The tug team reported this to the maintenance engineers, however, when they were subsequently questioned, they denied all knowledge of the apparent rotor brake failure. The pre-flight checks went without issue and the 37-minute flight went smoothly, and approaching the platform the wind was 36 knots gusting to 46 knots. The operator's limit was 60 knots for landing offshore and therefore the crew continued. However, the helicopter's flight management system indicated that the maximum wind speed was 60 knots, but the helicopter landed without incident at 8 minutes past 8. The passengers disembarked with the rotor still running, which is normal procedure, and a single passenger boarded for the flight back to Aberdeen. The crew performed pre-departure checks during which a tail gear box chip detection warning appeared on the flight navigation display master caution list. This is a warning that appears when debris is detected in the helicopter gearbox and therefore warning the crew that the gearbox has potentially been damaged. The captain decided to contact the engineering department in Aberdeen over the telephone, and the advice from them was to shut the helicopter down and wait for further instructions. The winds at the time were 36 knots gusting to 46, and when the rotor speed dropped below 50%, the rotor brake was applied. However, the rotors did not fully stop and continued to slowly turn. The crew left the helicopter clearing under the back of the disc to the right as that offered the best clearance. After around 40 minutes, the commander returned to the helicopter with 2 members of the platform's crew and attempted to tie down the rotors, but they couldn't do this as the rotors were still turning. Additionally, the straps available didn't even fit the fixings on the helicopter pad, and different straps had to be acquired from elsewhere. Whilst all this was going on, the wind direction had changed and was now hitting from the helicopter's right side, and when 3 of 4 straps had been secured, one of the helicopter blades suddenly lifted near to vertical and partially broke off, hanging down whilst continuing to spin, narrowly avoiding one of the crew members who was still trying to tie the final strap down. The blade eventually completely separated from the aircraft and fell into the sea. The crew decided at that point to abandon further attempts to tie things down and return inside. Over the next couple of hours, 3 of the remaining blades also snapped off and fell onto the helicopter pad. Somewhat alarmingly, in December 2011, an EC225LP helicopter, registration Golf Charlie Hotel Charlie Mike, landed at the same platform in similar wind conditions due to a tail rotor problem. Again, the crew struggled to tie down the helicopter, reporting the straps were incorrect for both the helicopter and the pad anchor point, and that some of the anchor points had been painted over and were corroded. This helicopter also suffered from snapped blades. Back to the incident in question, subsequent investigation by the AAIB showed that the rotor brake had failed due to seizing of the right side brake pad within the ring, because of a build-up of organic material. There was a missed opportunity to identify this failure before the helicopter left Aberdeen, which became then a significant factor in the sequence of events leading to the blade failures, as it wasn't possible to tie them down appropriately. Additionally, there was some recent construction activity on the platform which had not accounted for how this would affect the local wind environment when exposed to strong winds, likely exacerbating the wind speed and direction on the pad at the time of the incident. There were several safety recommendations made to multiple agencies, and the operator has instituted a requirement that pilots record the time taken for the rotor blades to stop after a brake application, and that adjustment is required if this time exceeds 40 seconds. Finally, we'll discuss an accident from general aviation where the pilot's actions and behaviour leave many questions. The 54-year-old pilot, with an unknown total experience but definitely no flights within the previous 3 months, was flying a RANS S6 ESD XL registration Golf Mike Zulu Bravo uniform and had departed from Draycott Farm airstrip with his son on board. The aircraft was operating on a permit flight release certificate, as its permit to fly had expired on the 23rd of August 2023, almost 6 months preceding the accident flight. Now, some aircraft would never meet the sufficient safety standards to receive a certificate of airworthiness, but could still be considered safe to fly in UK airspace, and statistics show that such aircraft are no more or less likely to be involved in incidents and accidents than aircraft holding a certificate of airworthiness. Common examples include self-built aircraft or ex-military aircraft and certain microlight aircraft, which will never have a certificate of airworthiness but might be perfectly safe to fly. If a permit to fly has expired, then an inspection and check flight are required. To make this legal, a permit flight release certificate is issued, which is only valid for 2 weeks. A witness stated that on approach to runway 10 at Yatesbury, the aircraft was a little low, and others told the AAIB that the pilot had flown in with the expectation of completing a licence revalidation flight with an instructor. The pilot and his son boarded the aircraft and departed from runway 10 into the circuit. Witnesses said that on takeoff the aircraft drifted right and nearly departed the runway, and that the nose landing gear even entered the long grass to the side of the runway surface. It then managed to climb away and turn onto the crosswind leg to remain in the circuit. The pilot reported that during the landing, at about 10 feet above the runway, he felt the effect of the crosswind and couldn't correct the aircraft's flight path, and as a result landed on the nose and left landing gear, causing damage to both. The propeller was also damaged and the windscreen cracked. The same witnesses concerned at the events of the aircraft taking off also watched it land. They reported it was to the right of the centreline, low and slow with no flaps deployed. One of them commented that he thought it was heading towards a bank beside the runway. It then positioned more towards the runway centerline, but the left wing was seen to drop and the aircraft contacted the runway firmly, braking the landing gear and cartwheeling the aircraft so that it was facing in the opposite direction. This is all visible in the image from the report. The aircraft damage is also shown in this photograph. Now, believe it or not, the pilot told the AAIB that he didn't think this event was reportable. Both occupants were luckily uninjured, but a crash of this magnitude, which obviously is going to result in major repairs being required to the aircraft, is the very definition of an aircraft accident and is of course reportable to the AAIB and the police. But this wasn't the only issue with the pilot's attitude and behaviour. As I've mentioned, the aircraft's permit to fly expired in August 2023, and the pilot informed the AAIB that since September 2023 the aircraft had been undergoing maintenance, including fitting of new skins, new engine rubber mounts and new longerons in the fuselage. The Light Aircraft Association administer the aircraft's permit to fly, and they provided the AAIB with multiple records. Amongst them, inspection reports not properly signed, worksheets for the aircraft skin replacement and engine maintenance which weren't authorised as required by an inspector, a weight report not signed by an inspector, a maintenance schedule not signed by an inspector. Later similar documents were also received which were correctly signed. However, even then some of them were rejected because they detailed maintenance work which was never approved. The AAIB spoke with two Light Aircraft Association inspectors who had been recently involved with the aircraft. The first stated they had identified several defects requiring attention, but the aircraft had its new covering fitted before it could be determined if these problems had been sorted. Nevertheless, the inspector signed a permit flight release certificate so that the aircraft could be flown the short distance to its new home base, as the old base was becoming unavailable. That inspector actually refused to be involved with the aircraft in the future due to the concerns over maintenance, incomplete records and other issues which the AAIB don't go into in much more detail. The second inspector was also concerned about the lack of records. They said the new skin was a bit wrinkly and had not seen any documentation for that work in particular. But, as with the first inspector, the second inspector signed a permit flight release certificate, and this is the certificate which was valid at the time of the accident. Witnesses at the accident airfield who were familiar with the type of aircraft said the skin was not done to a good standard, not done correctly at all, and that the aileron and flap skins were done upside down and the bolt holes did not line up with the bolts. Unfortunately, the rest of the report does not reflect well on the behaviour of the pilot either. The AAIB asked the pilot for his licence and logbook details, however he refused to disclose them and they had to ask the Civil Aviation Authority for their details on the pilot. This showed that he had a National Private Pilot's Licence with a microlight rating valid until the 30th of November 2019. The AAIB weren't able to confirm if the licence had ever been revalidated, which is required every year for these type of licences. However, the pilot had previously declared to the Light Aircraft Association that he carried out a revalidation test flight on 25th of November 2023. When the AAIB approached the pilot's home airfield, they found that there was no record of any such flight. I've also mentioned that the pilot had his son on board. The law states that if flying passengers, you must have carried out 3 takeoffs and 3 landings within the previous 90 days. He hadn't flown at all for 126 days. So it seems this pilot has a clear record of not following correct procedures, making false declarations relating to maintenance work and licensing issues, so in other words, a complete lack of respect towards aviation safety. I've never seen such a scathing remark from an AAIB inspector in a report which states, "It is disappointing that the pilot did not engage with this safety investigation, whose purpose is to improve aviation safety by determining the circumstances and causes of air accidents and serious incidents and promoting action to prevent recurrence." The report also lists the regulations the pilot had contravened, stating that doing so can lead to a substantial penalty, including a custodial sentence. In summary, the accident occurred after the pilot lost control during the landing. He had no recent flying experience and potentially had an invalid license, was flying passengers illegally, and had an aircraft which had recently undergone substandard maintenance. Absolutely unbelievable behaviour from the pilot, which could have caused the death of himself and his son. That's all from this month's AAIB Bulletin Debrief. I hope you enjoyed the video. Remember to like, comment and subscribe. We'll see you next month for another wrap up when the bulletin is released. Bye bye.